Welcome. I'm Frank Vignone, President and CEO of Old Salem Museums and Gardens and the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts. I'm sitting in the Single Brothers house in the room that is interpreted as the tailor's room, which is why I've got my needle and thread right here and all of this clothing on the wall. This is our third live Ask Me Anything question and answer. I have Samantha Smith here who will be fielding the questions. She's Director of Community Engagement. She's also the one doing all the filming, so she's multitasking. So why don't we just jump in and I'll ask any questions. Please put them in any of the chats. Sam will be keeping up with them, and if you don't get the answer fully that you were hoping for, please just ask us again. If I can't answer in this session, we will get an answer and we'll put it in our next live session. So there's no reason why we all shouldn't get some good answers from today. Thank you, Sam.
Happy to do it, Frank. Our first question is there any possibility of bringing back summer camps for kids and youth, kind of similar to the 5 Yesterdays program we used to do?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I get that question a lot. I have to step back a little bit. It's even before my time. The summer camps at Old Salem were started during a time period where double income families weren't that prevalent. And the summer camp program was half-day programs, and there really wasn't a lot of competition for summer camps. As partnered family teams both started working, they needed children to go to full summer camp days. So there were several problems with that for Old Salem. One is that the summer camps that we provided were really decades old, and they were highly labor intensive. They were great and people loved them, but as we got more competition, our prices had to keep increasing, and we could never be as low as the other summer camps. In addition, our summer camp was always 1/2 of a day. We did offer 2 half days, but that still didn't satisfy what the demographic needed. When we did look into offering full day summer camps, the cost of those summer camps, because they were so labor intensive, far exceeded, if not double, what our competition were. So the answer is that what we could offer for the price that we needed to charge was not something that people were willing to pay for. Now with that, I want to step aside and say that in 2017, when I came to Old Salem, we did a complete program analysis. And that's because all of the different divisions were putting on programs. No one was really talking to each other about whether or not those programs were paying for themselves or if they were making money. And so in that program analysis, we found out that 60-something% of all of the programs that Old Salem and MESDA were putting on were actually losing money. And what that meant was the money, operational money that was going to pay for those programs, subsidizing those programs, actually were taking away from our core mission of education, which really is the reason why Old Salem and MESDA are here. The summer camp was part of that program analysis. And in analyzing the summer camp, we found out that we could not charge enough and people were not willing to pay that amount that would be really kind of collaborative in the business model. So the summer camps were canceled, and it's really out of the canceling of the summer camps that our Salem Saturdays and hands-on workshops grew, because we always imagined those hands-on workshops to be intergenerational. Because our new demographic really needed help on the weekends for quality time with parents and their kids and grandparents and their grandkids. So I'm afraid that's not the answer you wanted to hear. I can't see us bringing those summer camps back, certainly not in the same way. And we have been experimenting with ways that we can provide the same kind of cool, tactile experience, for kids, and we'll continue to tweak that.
We just had a really interesting question come in from the MESDA stream.
Yeah.
Frank wants to know, what is the criteria for obtaining furniture for MESDA?
Well, if, for instance, you own something yourself, you simply need to send an email to our chief curator, Daniel Ackerman. We do get a lot of requests for information, but also analyses of different furniture items as well as artifacts themselves. We do have a program which is where we go outside of the district and photograph important pieces of furniture and artifacts and put them in our MESDA database. We don't actually acquire them, but they're so important that we think it's valuable for everybody in context to know about that piece of furniture or that artifact. So certainly, we're always open to these things, and you can contact us.
Thanks, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
A question that we consistently get, which is an important one, is, Frank, why is Old Salem still closed?
Okay, so there's really like two parts to this. The first one, COVID related. That's last year, and we know that as of June 1st, at least in North Carolina, the governor is going to lift a lot of the COVID restrictions. We took COVID seriously and considered it to be a very real threat to the health of our staff and our visitors, so we closed on March 13th, I think it was, of last year. That's why we remained closed throughout the year. Now, as things are lifting, and people are getting vaccinated, and the CDC just came out with new guidelines for those vaccinated. The reason why we will be remaining closed or having a hybrid operations model, and we're still in the middle of analyzing all of that, is because starting in January for 8 weeks, our 21-person leadership team did a deep dive into the data of our operations. And what we realized was even if we could open because of COVID, which as I said, we can very quickly, 70% of our revenue that help us pay for people's salaries and property taxes and electricity and all of that come from school groups. And we have investigated with the school districts that come to Old Salem, and they have told us definitely no field trips this school year. Most likely very, very limited field trips next school year. It's most likely that field trips from schools will resume at a significant level in the fall of 2022. Then we analyzed our walk-in visitation numbers. And on average, we would get around $1,400 worth of ticket revenue from walk-in visitors a day, and our daily operations amount just to open the doors and pay staff is around $9,500. So if you take the student groups out and you just have walk-in visitors that bring in around $1,400 a day, that would leave us at the end of this year hovering somewhere between $3 million and $4 million in deficit. So our analysis showed us that in order for Old Salem to be here in the future, we have to have a very gradual reopening and open when demand increases. Now I know again, that's not what a lot of people want. We want emotionally to be open. We also know that tourism in Winston-Salem need Old Salem to be a part of the economy. Just yesterday, I spoke to the City Council, describing in detail the things that I just mentioned here, that in order for us to open, we need assistance because you can understand every day that we're open, we run a strong deficit. And my job as president and CEO is to sustain the organization in the long term, way beyond when I'm no longer here, and way beyond when our 21-person staff leadership team are no longer here. So unfortunately, that means we have to make hard decisions right now. So a year from now or 2 years from now, that we are financially strong. So that's really a two-part answer, Sam. One is the COVID part, which we're coming out of, and the other one is the financial school group part, which we're really just entering into. And yesterday I made the point that as the rest of us start to breathe a sigh of relief as we're vaccinated, Old Salem actually is waiting for the flood that's following the storm of COVID. And that's because the residual effects of COVID as an economic model, as an economic storm, that's what Old Salem will experience in 2021. With no school groups, now is the time that we really will be hitting a wall in terms of our finances. Does that seem clear enough, Sam?
I think so, but just to be extra clear, we got an additional question on the Old Salem stream asking, are the museum buildings going to be opening soon?
Well, thanks for that question. So we are happy that we are, as we said, gradually reopening. And we'll talk more about this, but last month we opened Salem Pathways. That's the self-guided, choose your own character exterior touring, which you could come at any time. We are opening Winkler this coming month, actually this Saturday. Open Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 10 till 2. Then next month, we're going to be opening MESDA for Saturdays, and we'll make the specifics and the details of that available. And as demand increases, we'll be opening up more of MESDA's time so that you can come and see the artifacts in the galleries. The thing that is still up for question is, when will we start to have some form of historic interpretation with our costumed guides? And that I can't give you a really strong answer for, but right now, the historic building venues are closed because we're not prepared to open them for all the reasons that I just went through before. But as soon as we start to move in that direction, we'll be having Facebook Lives just like this. We'll certainly be putting out press releases. So the wheels are turning for this gradual reopening, but right now it's Salem Pathways, Winkler Bakery, and MESDA will open up next month.
That feeds into another question that we got, Frank, which is, what can I do if I visit? Can you just give people some idea of what it looks like if you come visit Old Salem right now?
Sure, and the Salem Pathways, that's the Choose Your Own Character smartphone app. You come into the district, we've put up these oak boxes with the character images on them that were designed and painted by Leo Rucker, a local artist. And so you'll follow the barcode, and that will literally take you around the district. You'll learn history. There's music associated with it. You'll be able to connect with the buildings on the exterior. You'll actually be directed into places of the district that you probably haven't been before. So you certainly could do that. Right now, we're in a kind of testing phase, so we're not asking for donations if you use that program. Once we get a better understanding of the Salem Pathways program, we will be asking for donations to help fund all of the back-end work that went into producing that program. But you can certainly do that now and be part of our beta testing phase. We would love that. And you can send us emails, and that's on the website as well. We've had a lot of people asking about Winkler, and again, Winkler will be open, and we've turned one side of Winkler into a retail space. So even though Moravian Book and Gift is not open as a retail space, we will be having a retail space in Winkler, as well as all of our fresh baked goodies. In addition to the goodies that you're used to, we're also every month now trying out new recipes. I want to say, as of this Saturday, lemon poppy seed bread is our special for this month. And again, MESDA will open up next month, not May, but June, and we'll gradually reopen that more fully as the demand increases. Now, on top of all of that, you can still schedule special scholarly appointments, academic tours, all of that in our Salem South program, which in fact we've been doing all last year. Now we're just expanding it to in-person. All of that can be, more information can be found online, and you can request scholarly and academic information and visits through our Study South tab, which is on our website. So even though our historic venues are not open, all of this is still going on, in addition to our fantastic Learning in Place videos, which have been really specifically designed to dovetail with school districts' curriculum. And then our Things online series, which we're comparing artifacts from our collection with artifacts internationally. Just last night we had a handful of really important amazing scholars talking about 2 artifacts. And so those sorts of things will continue as we move along. Certainly we have a very robust online presence, as well as the gradual physical presence in the historic district.
Can you talk a little bit more about commerce? So what sort of items other than baked goods we'll be able to offer in Winkler?
Sure. The thing that we were really proud of right before we had to close is that our handcrafted Salem line, which are pottery pieces, leather pieces, handmade books, things like that we made in-house in the historic district, and they were doing really well. The extra space at Winkler really will be highlighting our handcrafted Salem items and a lot of other smaller gift items. I think we're going to be having some books and probably some smaller children's pieces. What we wanted to do was, just as though we're gradually reopening the historic buildings, we wanted to gradually start to reintroduce our retail items. So going into Winkler, you should be able to get a little bit of everything, or close to everything, that we sell normally.
That's great. To switch gears a little bit, Frank, we had some questions about the recent painting that we've been working on. Can you talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the district to freshen it up for visitors?
So we started an initiative at the beginning of this year called the Fresh Coat Initiative. I don't know if all of you know, but the city of Winston-Salem has been doing really substantial street work in the historic district. Really dusty, really messy, but we're very thankful that it was happening, and the investment from the city has just been amazing. The district is really looking beautiful. But what it did mean is that we couldn't really repaint our buildings last year, and they were looking a little shabby. What we decided was, now that the majority of the street work is complete, and it's at the north end, so it started at the south and it's moved up, we decided to go building by building and prioritize, do any wood repair, any other kinds of repairs, and repaint the buildings. And we're just one by one going through the district. Really, it's so nice to walk around the district now and see these buildings with fresh coats of paint. So that's occurring, and then we are prioritizing preservation plans for each of our buildings. Robbie King, who is our Director of Interpreted Environments and Restorations, is producing strategic restoration plans for every single building. And in those plans, he's prioritizing what needs to happen now, what can happen next year, and just on and on. And so the next step of the Fresh Coat Initiative is looking at that and seeing what is now a substantial restoration that needs to happen. I'll give you an example, because one of the buildings we thought just needed to be repainted, that's the Herbst House. Upon closer inspection, we realized that there was a lot more wood rot under the surface than we expected. And so what's happened is that the Herbst House has gone from just repainting it to now segmenting its restoration and wood repair separate from the repainting process. I would say that our next painting project is going to be the Butner Hat Shop, and that will probably start within a week. So tons of great stuff happening with our Fresh Coat Initiative, and as part of the Fresh Coat Initiative, all of our staff picked up paintbrushes and gallons of paint and walked the district, I think it was last week, all the weeks are flowing together, and we painted all of the contributing built environment, fences, signposts, benches, all those sorts of things. So, you know, as we do gradually reopen, that the district looks really beautiful.
And Frank, I have a picture up now of the shutter that our joiner Ben repaired.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's the Mitch House shutter, if I'm not mistaken. While we're in the middle of this Fresh Coat Initiative, what we're seeing are artifacts and building parts, architectural building parts, that need significant repair. And so instead of putting them off as deferred maintenance, we now have the capability of rebuilding those things and doing serious repair. And Ben Masterson, who's a coordinator in our Learning in Place team, but also one of our restoration craftsmen, rebuilt that shutter, and it's a pretty great before and after picture, isn't it?
It certainly is. I'm going to ask you a specific question we got that's about paint.
Yeah.
What kind of paint do we use, and how do we apply it? And also, are the colors we use historically accurate?
Oh my gosh, those are a lot of questions all rolled into one. I will say that because of the Fresh Coat Initiative, we are filming at this very moment this week a series of color and preservation digital online videos where we're going through MESDA talking about different colors and how those colors throughout history have been interpreted in historic preservation. So we'll be getting into a lot more detail for the rest of this month, so be on the lookout. The paint that we're using for the exterior of the buildings is really the same kind of paint that all of you probably use to paint the exterior of your buildings. So it's really a kind of latex, it's a high-end latex paint that usually has primer as a part of it. It's a modern chemical compound, and we can match colors with the same base coat. It's really nothing unusual. There are far higher end cost paints that you can buy, but for what we're doing, it really is a good quality level paint material. With that being said, I think all of us know historically in the 1720s they didn't have latex paint. They would have used different kind of pigments and linseed oil with different brushes, and it would have had a more mottled finish. Its application would have been very particularized. And so as we are using paint that is very different than what paint they, for instance, would have used on the Mitch House when it was first built, that we're using different application methods because those application methods work with modern paints. And so if we were using old traditional paints, then we would have considered those more specific kinds of applications. You know, even in the 50s, they would have been using oil-based paints. And as we now become more environmentally conscious, there are real concerns about oil-based paints being used. And so even the new latex paints are getting better and better in terms of their application and their longevity. And so preservationists are moving in some ways away from even oil-based paints. What we're doing is we're experimenting with the future of preservation and making sure that we are environmentally conscious and that we're doing the best we can with the materials we have. Now in terms of the colors, you know, there's this idea that there are historic palettes. There are very specific colors, for instance, that Old Salem uses, or that the Moravians said use this color. The truth is, traditional paints, linseed oil-based paints with hand-ground pigments changed between bucket to bucket and bucket of paint. There really wasn't a kind of consistency about paint the way we can all go into the hardware store, pick out a paint color, and every time you go in there, that's the paint color that you're going to get. So this notion that there are historic palettes for colors is just inaccurate. The idea that Old Salem has a palette of color that they use is really just a choice we as maintenance of these historic buildings choose to do. The idea that a historic palette is in fact authentic is not accurate. It's really a kind of conjectural shorthand to get to the idea of generally these are colors that they would have used. Now, you know, the colors have changed from the 1940s and 50s to today. The paints have changed from the 1940s to today. So one thing you'll notice is if you look at historic palettes of colors from the 1950s and then the 1960s and then the 1980s, what you'll notice is those palettes tend to lean toward the fashionable colors, not of the period they're emulating, not of the 1720s, but of the 1970s. And it's a really fascinating study about historic paints and historic palettes and the kind of social fashion of using them. So I know that's a lot more of the answer that you wanted, but it's a fascinating study in historic preservation. Just to understand that even though we're using these colors, that for instance, every time the Mitch House would have been repainted, there most likely would have been tonal differences between those paints. You just don't experience those now because modern paints are fairly consistent. That's a wordy answer. Sorry, Sam.
No, that's wordy, but that's fascinating to me. And if that's also fascinating to you, you're in luck because we're having a great program for Preservation Month in May. So
Yeah.
For those of you who are wondering that, you'll have even more information. Oh, we just had a question pop up here on our Old Salem Facebook channel. Who makes the costumes for Old Salem?
Yep, our costume, but I would say maybe up to 3 years ago, we had our own costume shop. And the majority of those were hand sewn by both employees as well as volunteers. We looked at those early on, and I don't think a lot of people realize that those costumes, because they're essentially couture pieces, you know, they could be over $1,000 per costume. And it was a fairly costly division in Old Salem. We decided that what we wanted to do was pause with that division, acknowledge that historic clothing is a fundamental factor in our educational process, and reconsider how those costumes are made. And I'm going to step back a bit. We're doing it with almost everything, so it's not just the costuming. For instance, the seed saving lab, which was behind the scenes before, we found that to be so fascinating. We opened up a seed saving lab, which is fully public facing, and now all of that activity happens on Main Street. It's a ticketed venue. You can come and see them doing that. Research, our researchers for the Hidden Town Project and Moravian Research, that was all done behind the scenes. We found that so fascinating that we now have a public-facing research and archaeology lab in the visitor center. Our historic clothing process is also being considered for the exact same kind of public-facing lab. So my answer is really about the future of, and COVID kind of hit us right midstream because we were actually discussing and interviewing how to produce a public-facing historic clothing venue that people could actually see the clothing being made. So that's my answer. It's kind of, it's midstream right now, but hopefully, at least like in a few years, a year and a half, that we will have a kind of public-facing historic clothing venue that you can come and literally see the patterns and them being made, and then actually seeing them being used within the district.
Well, the person who asked that question replied and said, I would love to do a clothing workshop at Old Salem. And then at the same time, we got a great question on the MESDA page asking if we have considered doing workshops. This person was wondering, have we considered historic furniture or building restoration classes as we reopen using the old tools and methods? And this is a great chance to talk about the online classes Learning in Place is going to be offering in May.
Right, and so yes, it's been very difficult for Old Salem to be able to sustain hands-on workshops because it's so one-on-one and the numbers have to be fairly low. The price had to be fairly high even to break even. What we're trying now is a series of workshops that will be based online. We're also looking at a kind of new format for physical in-person workshops. We haven't lost this notion of tactile one-on-one workshops. We want to do those. We just have to figure out the right method for that. And I do know that our Learning in Place team are figuring out how we are going to experiment with these online workshops as well as the future real tactile workshops.
Thank you, Frank. And for those who are interested, I'm going to drop a link to the page that will have information about some classes coming up that these people might be interested in.
I mean, I myself have taken a pewter spoon class, and I got to put my initials on it. I mean, these classes are really amazingly compelling. It's surprisingly so. And they're also, especially now after a year of COVID, you just meet everybody in your class, and it's just a lot of fun. Remember me talking about the summer camps and that we had to cancel that whole program? The reason why we really targeted those hands-on workshops before COVID, of course, was because we wanted parents and grandparents to be with their children and grandchildren making, for instance, pewter spoons. It turned out to be just a really wonderful experience. We don't want to lose that. That is one of the significant things that Old Salem can bring as a visitor experience. The problem we have is the cost to do that it's fairly high. So we have to figure out the right way, logistically, to do that so it's not so expensive.
Great. I've got another question for you, Frank. Why should I retain my membership if you're not open?
That's a really good question. At the very beginning of COVID, we didn't think we'd be closed that long. That changed, obviously. Our development team, along with our senior leadership 21-person team, decided that we would extend memberships last year. During that time, we really started investigating the benefits of membership and maybe new ways that would be more progressive in how people could utilize what we have always called as a membership. One of the number one things that people bought memberships for was so they could actually visit Old Salem, bring their family, bring their friends. And so what we've been doing is thinking about how instead of memberships, we might transform them into annual passes. And those annual passes will really provide you with the number one thing that you wanted, which is the ability to get into the historic ticketed venues. My answer is we're in the middle of figuring all of that out. We will let everybody know about that. And we've even considered, even right now as we gradually reopen, extending those memberships one more time. Our goal is to keep our friends who want to visit us happy and engaged in however best to do that. So if you have any suggestions, certainly let us know. Michelle Cook, our development director, would be happy to hear from you about any ideas about membership. We put out a fairly extensive survey asking people about the membership benefits, and that's really what's guiding our analysis and conclusions right now.
We had an interesting comment here on the Old Salem Facebook page. I'm very curious to see how the public-facing clothing lab could come together and fit into the site from the perspective of an educational objective. Frank, can you talk a little bit about what we try to do here at Old Salem in terms of experience and the hands-on programs we offer and how a costume lab might fit into that?
Yeah, we've had a lot of these conversations. This question sounds like it's coming from a museum person, which I always love. We have talked about how, for instance, patterns for clothing resemble patterns for maps, and how maps actually change. So when you look at the various ways throughout history that the round sphere of the earth has been sliced and diced to become a flat map, it's very similar to the way clothing is designed. And one of the moves with our new Learning in Place educational concept is that we're taking math and science and art and history, and we're overlapping all of those into our visitor experience. So you could come into the clothing lab, and part of it would be looking at patterns and how those patterns are derived and how they relate to mapping and surveying of land. And so that would tie directly back to the forming of Salem with surveying equipment, and then also the relationship of textile production going from literally a cottage industry into manufacturing textile factories, which the Moravians in Salem were some of the first in North Carolina to push into manufacturing for textiles, and that some textile equipment are considered the first computers. So you can see how this just starts to become far more interesting than just stepping back in time and watching a tailor hand sew something, a pair of breeches or something, that clothing actually has many layers of important information. And then, of course, all of that in terms of clothing, the growing of the linen, the fabrication of the textiles, the actual sewing, and then the wearing, all has a relationship to our hidden town narrative, because all of those things most likely had a relationship to those enslaved. So you can see how these things could very definitely overlap from an educational perspective.
Someone asked if we would consider partnering with another institution to offer classes.
That's a great idea. Of course, in Winston-Salem, we have others that do, with a handful of others. We're happy to do that. That's one of our conversations. We just have to understand that everybody is trying to fund their operations. So it's not a partnering. It is a great thing to do, although actually making it work and figuring out the logistics, it's a fairly complicated thing. But we love our partners. There's no question about that. Old Salem and MESDA are better because of what we learn from our partnerships. So if you are one of those organizations, just give us a call.
Frank, what kind of volunteer positions do we have?
Oh, when we reopen, we'll have just a wide variety. Old Salem, at least as far as in my knowledge, hasn't had a really robust volunteer program. It's something that we decided that we wanted to start, and in fact, we've done a considerable amount of work this past year with formulating volunteer applications because we have a majority of our visitation are school children. There are background checks involved, and then there will be training. But we will be taking volunteers really in every department. Right now, we have research volunteers for the Hidden Town Project with Martha Hartley, who's our Director of Moravian Research. We will eventually be doing a volunteer program for actual maintenance woodworking, things like that. The list goes on and on. As we start to gradually reopen, now that we have a system to accept volunteers, and it's online as well, you might want to put that link on our page. Even though we're not accepting them fully, it certainly is something you could apply for right now, and we could put it on hold.
Thank you, Frank. I'll drop that link here for everyone.
Thanks.
We've got another question. Well, it's actually more of a comment here, Frank. Someone said if we had better management, we would be open. Because if Disney can be open, why can't Old Salem? What do you have to say to that comment?
Thank you for your comment. I appreciate that. Thank you for making that statement, although obviously, as president and CEO, I'd have to disagree with you. I think it's very solid, and I fully defend our 21-person leadership team in our analysis and our conclusions about being closed last year. We kept our staff and visitors safe by closing, and our gradual reopening is giving those decisions the same prudent application of data that we did last year. So I'd have to respectfully disagree. In fact, good management is being prudent and listening to the data. Now, of course, if you have data that I don't have, I am always open to that discussion. But right now, I stand firmly in our decisions last year, and I stand firmly in our decisions this year. The management that we're providing in stewarding Old Salem and the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts, I think is top notch. And I think when all of this is over, you will be very happy that we did what we've done. But thank you again for your comment.
Thanks, Frank. I'm going to add the volunteer link for anyone who's interested.
Thank you.
It's a little bit of a long URL, but if you go to support on our website, volunteer is right there under it. So please do. Okay. We have a question here about hiring back employees. Will we be hiring employees back?
Well, so much has changed in terms of our educational and interpretive program because really the fall before COVID hit, we had already formed a strategic plan to transform our educational and interpretation program into what we now call Learning in Place. We were really midstream in doing that when we closed. Since that time, we haven't slowed down. In fact, we've rewritten job descriptions. We have rewritten the educational curriculum that we're going to be using. We have started our new educational video program. All of these things are operations that did not exist prior to Learning in Place. With that being said, when we do start gradually reopening, all of our job responsibilities for educators and interpreters will be entirely new. Our expectations, our responsibilities, what we're actually looking for in our interpreters. As I just mentioned earlier about, for instance, the clothing lab. That person is not just about clothing. That person really needs to be about understanding ways that educationally this historic behavior, clothes making, can be conveyed to a lot of different subjects. So as you can tell, things will be considerably different. All those job descriptions will be posted. All of the jobs will be online. And I think you can also put the link up there as well. And we will be interviewing as part of our equity initiative. We have placed a good, solid process in place that everyone actually, starting last year, everyone now goes through the exact same process, interview process, and selection scoring process, really trying to make applying for and getting a job at Old Salem really clear and having parity among gender and race and everything else. It's been a real conscious effort on our part, and that's one reason why we'll be going through the hiring process when we gradually reopen.
Frank, we got a question about the MESDA appointments. Who makes decisions about the fees for doing research at MESDA? Is that outside of your realm or part of what you do? And also, she was asking about the fees because she's curious about the decisions let's see what she said. Decisions for research inquiries with staff. So, for example, search help.
Well, I think those questions, I have been a part of it, as well as our entire 21-person leadership team. But you can certainly pose these questions through our link and email online, and they'll get back to you and discuss that with you. I do think that they established a cost, but so many of these inquiries are unique. So in a way, it's almost like a boutique experience. I think you need to kind of let us know what you need. Above all else, we are a research and educational facility, and our goal is to help promote research and education. So just contact us. We'd be happy to talk with you.
Thank you, Frank. It looks like that's all of our questions
for
today. If you want to just leave us with some parting words of wisdom.
Well, I hope to see you Saturday at Winkler buying some treats. I think I'll be there. Maybe working the fire in the Winkler bake oven. I do appreciate everyone coming online, asking these questions. You can continue to ask the questions. We will be continuing these live question and answers. And you can even continue to write questions right now. There's no reason why we have to end. I'll just leave that up to you, Sam, whenever you'd like to end.
Right when you said that, we got another one.
Okay.
Is there a plan in place for new management of the tavern restaurant?
Good question. Yes. Right before COVID hit, we had gone through, I think it was a 6-month or 3-month RFP process to get the new vendor. Just to give you a little bit of background, we own the building that the tavern restaurant was housed within, and we lease it out to a restaurant vendor. That restaurant vendor decided no longer to keep the lease, so they left. And what we wanted to do was restore the building, add important ADA access issues, upgrade the HVAC and electrical and all of that stuff. Well, COVID shut us down. And at the time, Muddy Creek Cafe was chosen as the vendor for the historic tavern restaurant. And so that's really as far as that's gotten, because we decided in our leadership team, because restaurants were having such a difficult time in the city because of COVID, we really weren't going to pursue opening up the tavern restaurant until we felt like the other pre-existing restaurants had a stronger footing. And we have been talking with Muddy Creek, which already has a smaller cafe in Old Salem, and they are aware of this. They're a part of the decision making. So right now, the tavern restaurant will not be open. And in fact, what the tavern restaurant is as a visitor experience is still up for reimagining. But at this point, we do know that Muddy Creek Cafe will be the vendor for that building. So is that our last question?
I believe that's our last question.
All right.
I'm going to put the keep in touch information on the screen for anyone who wants to reach you with questions. I believe that's it, Frank.
All right. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.